The New Mexico territory stretched endless and indifferent beneath a merciless August sky. 17-year-old Isabel Morales stood at the edge of the arroyo, her calloused hands gripping the wooden handle of her father's shovel. The desert wind pulled at her dark hair, whispering secrets across the chaparral that no human ear was meant to hear. Behind her, wrapped in a faded blue shawl that had once belonged to their grandmother, 6-week-old Esperanza slept in ignorant peace. Isabel's throat burned with thirst and something deeper, a rage that had no name in the language of proper young women. The shovel's weight anchored her to the earth when she felt she might float away on the currents of her own fury. 3 hours earlier, she had awoken to the sound of her father's boots scraping across the packed earth floor of their adobe home, his shadow moving with terrible purpose toward her mother's bed, where the baby lay sleeping. "Another girl," he had muttered, the words soaked in mescal and disappointment. "Another mouth to feed. Another dowry we don't have." Isabel had watched through half-closed eyes as he lifted the swaddled infant. Her mother, exhausted from weeks of nursing and the lingering weakness of a difficult birth, did not stir. Something in her father's movements, a terrible gentleness, had jolted Isabel fully awake. She had seen him carry dead lambs that way, with the same reverent finality. Now the shovel bit into the hard-packed earth as Isabel dug. Not a grave as her father had intended, but a marker of her decision. Each thrust into the soil was a severing from him, from the life she had known, from the brutal certainty of what would have happened had she not followed him out here with her mother's kitchen knife pressed against his back. "You dig it yourself," she had told him, voice steady despite the trembling in her bones, "or I swear by the Virgin I'll put you in it instead." He had looked at her then with something like recognition, as though seeing in his daughter a reflection of himself that both repulsed and impressed him. Without a word, he had handed her the baby and walked away toward town, leaving the shovel embedded in the ground like a claim stake. The sun climbed higher as Isabel worked, marking the shallow ditch that would guide the seasonal rains away from the small shelter she was constructing from brush and canvas. A rustling sound drew her attention to the bundle where tiny fingers now reached skyward, grasping at nothing. "Patience, little one," Isabel murmured, driving the shovel into the earth one final time before moving to kneel beside her sister. "We can't go back, and we can't stay here." The baby's eyes, dark as wet obsidian, fixed on Isabel's face with an awareness that seemed impossible for one so new to the world. Isabel touched one finger to Esperanza's cheek, feeling the silk-soft skin, warm with life that their father had deemed worthless. "I won't let him near you again," she promised, the words carried away by the wind almost before they left her lips. "Not him, not anyone who sees only what you lack instead of what you are." In the distance, heat shimmers danced across the horizon, blurring the boundary between earth and sky. Isabel knew the dangers that awaited them, to girls alone in a land where life was held cheap and women's lives cheaper still. She had only the clothes on her back, her mother's silver crucifix, $12 sewn into the hem of her skirt, and the knife now tucked into her boot. It would have to be enough. The sound of approaching hoofbeats froze her blood too soon for her father's return, unless he'd borrowed a horse. Isabel snatched up Esperanza and the knife in one fluid motion, crouching behind a stand of mesquite as she watched the rider approach. It wasn't her father, but a stranger man whose weathered face spoke of years under harsh suns. He rode tall in the saddle, his clothes dust-covered but of good quality. A lawman, perhaps, or a rancher. The silver star pinned to his vest confirmed her first guess. "Hello, the arroyo," he called, his voice carrying the rasp of tobacco and trail dust. "Don't mean no harm, just passing through." Isabel remained silent, weighing her options as the baby squirmed against her chest. "Saw the fresh digging," he continued, dismounting with the careful movements of a man who expected no welcome but meant no threat. "Thought someone might need help." When he took a step toward the mesquite, Isabel rose to her full height, knife glinting in the sunlight. "Date se fare noc, señor." Chapter 2. The Law and the Land. The lawman's shadow stretched long across the cracked earth, meeting Isabel's own like dark water flowing into dark water. Neither moved as the seconds stretched between them, marked only by the soft cooing of the baby and the patient huffing of the man's horse. Isabel kept the knife steady, though her arm ached with the effort of holding both weapon and child. "Name's Sheriff Thomas Blackwood," he said finally, removing his hat to reveal hair the color of iron filings. His eyes, pale blue like water over limestone, took in the shallow trench Isabel had dug, the makeshift shelter, the absence of supplies that spoke louder than words. "And I reckon you're in some kind of trouble, Miss." "We're managing fine," Isabel replied, the lie brittle as sun-bleached bone. The sheriff nodded slowly, replacing his hat with deliberate care. "That your grave you're digging, or someone else's?" The question hung between them, dangerous as a rattlesnake. Isabel shifted Esperanza to her other arm, the movement causing the baby to stir and fuss. "It's no grave. It's for the rain." Something in the sheriff's face softened, the lines around his eyes deepening, not with suspicion but with a recognition that made Isabel's throat tighten. He'd seen this before, women and children abandoned, fleeing, surviving on nothing but grit and desperation. "Your PA know where you are?" he asked, though his tone suggested he already knew the answer. "My father thinks my sister should be dead." Isabel said, the words falling from her lips like stones. He won't find us. Blackwood nodded again, a single dip of his chin that acknowledged truths too harsh for gentler gestures. He reached slowly into his saddlebag, telegraphing each movement as if approaching a spooked mare. Isabel tensed, but what emerged was not a weapon but a bundle wrapped in oilcloth. Jerky and hardtack, he explained, setting it on a flat rock between them. And there's a canteen of fresh water. Won't turn down your hospitality if you've a mind to share your fire tonight. Isabel didn't lower the knife, but she felt its weight more keenly now. Why would you help us? The sheriff's gaze drifted beyond her to the vast expanse of desert, stretching toward the horizon. I had a daughter once, he said simply. Fever took her when she was just 4. Her mama followed the next winter. His eyes returned to Isabel's face, and in them she saw not pity but a respect that straightened her spine. Some men think the only strength worth having is the kind that breaks things. Never understood that myself. Night fell quickly in the desert, darkness rolling across the land like water flooding a dry creek bed. The small fire cast shifting shadows against the arroyo wall, transforming the mundane into something almost sacred. Isabel sat with her back against sun-warmed stone, Esperanza asleep in a nest of blankets the sheriff had produced from his pack. The knife remained close at hand, but no longer clutched like salvation. Blackwood worked in silence, fashioning a more substantial shelter from the brush Isabel had gathered and canvas from his own supplies. His movements were economical, born of years spent making do with little in unforgiving country. When he spoke it was without looking at her, his hands never ceasing their labor. There's a widow woman up near Santa Fe runs a trading post since her husband passed. Name's Widow Santiago. His voice was as rough as the land itself, but not unkind. Known to take in strays from time to time. Might be she could use help with the books and such. She reads and writes, but her eyes ain't what they were. The firelight caught the silver of his badge, winking like a distant star. Isabel studied his profile, weathered as the mountains on the horizon. Why would she take us in? Because I'd ask it of her. He met Isabel's gaze then, his own steady as bedrock. And because 20 years back, someone did the same for her, when she had nothing but the clothes on her back and a baby boy at her breast. Isabel looked down at Esperanza, so small against the vastness of the desert night. To run alone had seemed the only choice that morning. But now, with darkness pressing close and the coyotes' cries echoing from distant hills, the impossibility of their survival hung heavy as a storm cloud. My father, she began, the words catching, like thorns in her throat. He'll look for us. Men like that, Blackwood said, feeding another stick to the fire. They got short memories for what they throw away, long ones for what gets taken. He paused, hand stilling for the first time. But if he comes, he'll find more waiting than just 2 girls alone. The fire popped and hissed, sending a shower of sparks upward toward the cold, clear stars. Isabel felt something inside her chest shift, not hope exactly, for hope seemed too fragile a thing to survive in such harsh country. Something more akin to the certainty desert plants must feel when their roots at last touch water deep beneath the surface. Santa Fe, she repeated, tasting the name like a promise. How far? 4 days' ride, Blackwood replied. Less if we push hard. More, if we're careful with the little one. He nodded toward Esperanza. Dawn comes early. Best get some rest. Isabel didn't respond, but as the sheriff turned away to tend his horse, she allowed her eyes to close. Sleep, when it came, was deeper than any she'd known since her sister's birth. She dreamed not of her father's rage or her mother's tears, but of mountains she'd never seen and a life not yet lived. Chapter 3. Iron and Mercedon broke like a fever, painting the eastern sky in hues of amber and blood. 3 days on the trail had worn Isabel's hands raw from holding the reins of the spare mare Blackwood had somehow produced on their second day. The animal, gentle-eyed but strong-backed, carried both sisters with patient forbearance, matching its pace to the sheriff's more spirited stallion. They rode now through a landscape transformed. The flat desert had given way to rolling hills dotted with pinyon and juniper, their scent sharp and clean in the morning air. Mountains rose in the distance, their slopes dark with pine and fir, a world away from the sun-scorched arroyo where Blackwood had found them. We'll reach the Santiago place by nightfall, the sheriff said, breaking a silence that had stretched comfortable between them for miles. Best you know what to expect. Isabel adjusted Esperanza against her chest, the baby swaddled tight against the morning chill. These dawn hours were peaceful, her sister content with the steady rhythm of the horse beneath them and the warmth of Isabel's body. Soon enough, hunger would wake her, demanding with surprising force for one so small. Tell me, Isabel said, her voice carrying the same roughness as the sheriff's now, shaped by trail dust and the smoke of 3 campfires. Blackwood squinted toward the horizon, his face a map of weathered lines in the strengthening light. Consuelo Santiago ain't what folks expect. Her husband was Welsh, not Mexican. She took his name but kept her ways. He adjusted his hat against the rising sun. She's hard but fair. Won't suffer fools or men who can't keep civil tongues in their heads. And her son? Isabel asked, remembering what Blackwood had told her about the baby boy who had come with the widow to this country. A shadow passed across the sheriff's face, brief as a cloud across the sun. Jacob's been gone these 3 years now. Took up with a rough crowd out of Albuquerque. Last I heard he was riding with the Keller brothers. He didn't need to elaborate. Even in the isolated village where Isabel had grown up, the Keller name was spoken in hushed tones. Cattell thieves and worse. Does she know? The widow. She knows. Blackwood's voice held a finality that discouraged further questions. Loss changes people. Some it makes harder, some it breaks entirely. His eyes, when they met hers, held something. Isabel recognized the same banked fire she felt when she thought of her father's hands reaching for her sister. Consuelo Santiago ain't the breaking kind. They rode in silence as the sun climbed higher, casting their shadows short beneath the horses' hooves. Isabel's thoughts turned to her mother, left behind in that adobe house with its dirt floor and single window. She wondered if the woman had awakened to find both daughters gone. If she had wept or simply accepted this latest loss with the same blank resignation that had greeted all the others. There had been no time for goodbyes, no moment to explain, only the desperate certainty that to stay meant Esperanza's death, and perhaps her own. Will he hurt her? The question escaped before Isabel could contain it. My mother. Will he blame her for what I did? Blackwood considered this with the seriousness it deserved, his gaze fixed on the trail ahead. Men like your father, they need someone to blame. But they need someone to cook their meals and warm their beds more. The bluntness of his assessment made Isabel flinch, but she couldn't deny its truth. He'll rage, then he'll drink, then he'll go on as before. Men like that always do. Esperanza stirred against Isabel's chest, tiny fists working free of her blanket to wave in protest at some infant dream. Isabel touched one finger to her sister's cheek, marveling at the softness there. The perfect miniature of fingernails, the dark sweep of lashes against skin, the color of burnished copper. So small to have caused such upheaval. To have ties that should have been unbreakable. Sheriff, she said, the question that had haunted her for days finally finding voice. What kind of father buries his own child? Blackwood's shoulders stiffened beneath his trail-worn coat. For a long moment, only the creak of saddle leather and the steady rhythm of hooves marked the passage of time. When he finally spoke, his voice held the weight of judgment long considered, that stirred, the kind that deserves to lose his daughters. He turned in the saddle then, his eyes meeting hers with unflinching directness. The world's full of men who plant seeds then curse the harvest. Don't make it right, just makes it common. The trail narrowed as it wound upward through stands of cedar, forcing them to ride single file. Isabel followed Blackwood straight back, the words settling into her like stones dropping into still water. Ahead, the mountains loomed larger, with each passing hour, their slopes promising shelter, and perhaps, if fortune favored them, something like home. Chapter 4. Sanctuary of Stone and Sky. The trading post rose from the foothills like something born of the earth itself, walls of stacked stone and timber darkened by years of sun and storm. Smoke curled from a stone chimney, carrying the scent of pinnin and something else meat cooking. Spices, the promise of warmth against the gathering twilight. Isabel felt her stomach clench with hunger and something more complex. Apprehension coiled around a fragile tendril of hope. Blackwood dismounted first, his boots raising small clouds of dust as they struck the packed earth of the yard. 3 dog-lean wolfish creatures with alert eyes approached with wagging tails rather than bared teeth, recognition softening their vigilance. The sheriff greeted each by name, his rough hand passing over scarred heads with casual affection. Consuelo, he called toward the trading post, got visitors that need tending. The woman who emerged from the shadowed doorway was not what Isabel had expected, though she couldn't have said exactly what she had anticipated. Consuelo Santiago stood tall and straight despite the silver threading her black hair, which was pulled back in a simple knot at her nape. Her face, lined by years, and weathered, held the dignified beauty of mountain stone, weathered but unyielding. She wore a simple dress of dark wool with a man's leather vest over it, a heavy ring of keys hanging at her waist speaking of authority and ownership. Her eyes sharp as obsidian chips took in Isabel, the baby, and their meager belongings in one comprehensive glance. Whatever judgment formed behind those eyes remained unspoken as she turned to Blackwood. Thomas, she acknowledged, her voice carrying the faint music of a homeland left behind decades ago, bringing strays again. These ones need more than most, he replied. The words carrying a weight Isabel felt in her chest. The widow's gaze returned to Isabel, lingering this time on the protective way she cradled Esperanza, on the determined set of her jaw, on the wariness that no amount of Blackwood's reassurance had completely erased. You have a name, girl? The question held no softness, but neither was there cruelty in it. Isabel Morales, she answered, straightening her spine despite the ache of days in the saddle. This is my sister Esperanza. Something flickered in the widow's expression, a shadow of memory, perhaps, or recognition of a pain similar to one she'd carried. Hope, she translated, her voice softer now, a heavy name for one so small. Isabel said nothing, sensing that this moment balanced on a knife's edge of possibility. The widow studied her a moment longer, then gestured toward the house with a decisive movement. Come inside. The baby needs milk and you look half-starved yourself. She turned without waiting for a response. The matter apparently settled in her mind. Blackwood offered Isabel a hand down from the horse, steadying her when her legs threatened to buckle after so many hours riding. "Told you she takes in strays," he murmured, the ghost of a smile softening his weathered face. The interior of the trading post smelled of coffee, leather, tobacco, and dried herbs hanging in bunches from the rafters. One half served as a store, shelves stocked with necessities for the isolated ranches and farms scattered through the foothills. The other opened into living quarters, simple but clean, with a stone fireplace where a pot bubbled with something that made Isabel's mouth water. "Sit," Consuelo directed, pointing to a sturdy table scarred by years of use. "Thomas, there's coffee if you're staying." The sheriff shook his head. "Need to make Silver City by tomorrow. Just wanted to see these two settled proper." He turned to Isabel, something like regret in his pale eyes. "Trading post gets all kinds passing through. Some might ask questions about a young woman and baby traveling alone." Isabel understood what remained unspoken. Her father might come looking, might hear rumors, might follow the trail they'd left. "What should I tell them?" she asked, voice steady despite the fear that coiled anew in her stomach. "Nothing," Consuelo answered before Blackwood could speak. She set a bowl of stew before Isabel with a decisive thud. "You're my niece from Tucson, come to help after your husband died of fever. The baby is yours." She fixed Isabel with that obsidian stare. "Simple. Stories are easier to remember, easier to believe."